Alrighty, we are ready to read in a minute or two from the book of Esther. I've been hitting the button way too fast. There we go. What do you think, Jim? Is that what you're here to do?
That's what I'm here to do.
Okay, go for it.
Esther 9:20 through 26, page 415. And Mordecai recorded these things and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far.
There you go.
Obliging them to keep the 14th day of the month Adar, and also the 15th day of the same, year by year, as the days on which the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month that they had been turned from them from sorrow into gladness, and from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and gladness, days for sending gifts of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews accepted what they had started to do, and what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of all Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is, cast lots, to crush and destroy them. But when it came before the king, he gave orders in writing that his evil plan that he had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore they called these days Purim, after the term Pur.
Therefore they called these days Purim. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah.
Right in there's good, or maybe not. I'm sure it'll work. You know what? That's fine. Good job. Thank you. Hey, come on. We got to do this. Jim. It's incomplete. There we go. Whew, that was close. All right. Anyway, this is Grace Life Bible Church, and we are resilient disciples who, when we need a reversal, we look to God. He is the author of redemption. He's the author of everything that turns around for good. And so we're going to see that today, but our core values are knowing God and His Word, experiencing grace, the grace of Jesus that He showed us on the cross. He rose from the dead. We grow in healthy relationships, and we impact those near and far, all founded from a personal, vibrant faith that we respond to His goodness in love. Next Sunday, we're kicking this off, okay? We're going to end Esther today, so next Sunday, we're going to kick off our summer series of wisdom, worship, and worry. And so various things in Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, things like that. So that's kind of where we're going. And again, if you have a topic or something that you see there that you think would be fun or appropriate, you can share it with Toby or myself. Happy to consider that. But this is sort of a theme we've had where we're seeing God's fingerprints all over the book of Esther. And if you've been with us, you know that God's name is never mentioned in the book of Esther. And yet He is very much present. His fingerprints. All these things happen just right at just the right time, and so it's completely clear. And so I think this is week 3. This is the theme of that one. I'm safe because I'm not alone. I'm loved, and God knows my future, and His fingerprints are on my story long before I encounter a crisis. And so that gives us hope. It's interesting. I'll bring this up later, but briefly, Jesus didn't come to remove sin. It's still here. He didn't come to disappear sin. He came to conquer it and comfort us in brokenness. Isn't that interesting? And so we'll unpack that later. But where do you see God's fingerprints in your life is a good question. We've been asking that. We probably don't want to stop asking that today because we'll be done, right? And so here's where we're at. Esther, where is God? God can be found in places where you least expect to find Him, and God can find you in places you least expect to be found. That's kind of where we've been going on. I got a question for you. Why is the book called Esther and not Mordecai? Mordecai shows up first. He's the guy that does so many things. The very last verse is awkwardly praising Mordecai. I'll explain that, but that would be a legit name. If you turned this paper into your English professor and you named it Mordecai, you're losing no points. Because literarily, yeah, of course. Why isn't it called Purim? Right? Because that's a big deal. Okay, well, we'll explain that We'll find that out. But here's where we've been. These are God's fingerprints. Am I alone? No, you're not alone. He is there behind the scenes. Am I beautiful or adequate? Our beauty or adequacy doesn't come from how we perform for the king, because the ultimate king has already performed for us because he loves us. Am I safe? We covered that one. His fingerprints are on our story before we encounter a crisis. We're not the center of our story. He is. That right there is interesting because at the end of the book, we're praising Mordecai a ridiculously amount. So there's a thing going on there. Anyway, am I trusting God's plans? Am I trusting his timing? Can I hope? And today, the final one, am I trusting his script? I'm gonna unpack that, but there's a storyline that he is weaving, and if he's gonna flip the script, we want to make sure we're on board with him doing that. Okay? So a little this. If you're visiting, you're like, what in the world's going on? But I just love history, and I need to spread it out. Okay, so just hang with me. So in the Bible, there are various kings. The first king is named Saul. The second king was David, and then Solomon. Solomon dies, and the kingdom of Israel splits into two parts, north and south. Israel's in the north, Judah's in the south. Now, Israel, there was not a single good king in anywhere there, and in 722 BC, Assyria just nukes and ends Israel. They're annihilated. They're gone. They never come back until 1948. Your grandma probably knows about that. Anyway, and then in the year 612 BC, Babylon takes over after Assyria, and 3 different times, Babylon swoops into Judah in the south, Jerusalem area and beyond, and they take captives. And they take the smart, skilled engineers because they want to employ them in the great kingdom of Babylon, okay? That's what they did. And in 586, the temple's destroyed. And then Cyrus is the king of Persia, and about 539, Persia takes over from Babylon. And now Cyrus was a very tolerant guy. So tolerant, I'll read this verse later, but he says to the Jews, hey, go home. If you're still here because Babylon took you here, just go home. You're free to go. Very tolerant. But listen to this, subsequent Persian kings were absolutely not that tolerant. And that's the kind of king that the story of Esther happens under. Okay, Xerxes was not tolerant. And so then we have the story of Esther right here sandwiched between the two halves of Ezra. If you're in the book of Ezra and you turn from chapter 6 to chapter 7, you have blasted through the entire story of Esther. That's just where it happens, okay? And so last week, someone asked me, a friend asked me, hey, you say that Esther is the last book in the Old Testament, but then you said that 30 years later, the children of Israel in the book of Nehemiah don't know Hebrew and that they're marrying all the local women. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good question. So, yeah, and Nehemiah is the last book. Esther, there's evidence it was written after Nehemiah, like written the last. But anyway, so Nehemiah is the last book on the timeline. In terms of writing, it might be Esther. Doesn't matter. Anyway, okay. Now, if we zoom into the book of Esther, the book of Esther happens in about 10 years or so. Ever hear of the Battle of Marathon? Darius, right? Greeks defeated Persian king Darius at Marathon. His son Xerxes, now in the Bible, his name is Ahasuerus, Hebrew name. His Greek name is Xerxes, same guy. But anyway, he becomes king, and 3 years later, the book of Esther starts, very first chapter, very first verse, in the 3rd year of his reign, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so that's when our book starts. He has 4 years of planning for this big battle against Greece. He's trying to get back at Greece for beating Dad. And he ends that 4-year planning session with a 180-day Persian prep rally and pep rally to defeat Greece. And Vashti is the female representation of all the beauty of Persia. And she's supposed to go out there with her pom-poms and go, yay, yay. And she's like, nah, I'm not doing that. There was probably some other stuff going on. But anyway, she doesn't do that. She gets demoted from queen to concubine. And then there's this vacant. But then he goes off and he fights wars for a couple years. And he's unsuccessful. He comes back and he's like, oh, yeah, the queen thing. What are you doing? And so then that Esther enters the story. And then we go on from there. Okay? So That is where we are. Let's go to chapter 9, verse 1. Chapter 9, verse 1. Now, in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same month, when the king's command and edict were about to be carried out. Okay, right there you'd be like, well, wait a minute. There are a couple edicts. Well, this would be the first one. He goes on. On the very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain mastery over them, the reverse occurred, and the Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. That's kind of like a summary of the whole book, right? This is the script, and the script is to annihilate all the Jews in the Persian kingdom, which includes Israel, which includes David, Solomon's descendants, which would include the line of the Messiah. Okay? This is where we're going. Do I need my story to be reversed? They needed their story to be reversed, right? Because if our story is not reversed, we're dead. So this is a very, very serious, very real threat. And so we're asking that question, how does God flip a story? How does he flip the script? Okay? All right, so that's kind of where we're at. And so this is going to get violent in the text. Lots of bloodshed, lots of deaths. And so we have to kind of step back and ask the question, am I responding to the text through the values of my culture, or am I aware of the values of their culture? They're very different, okay? And so we have our own culturally formed views about violence. And here the author is expecting us to cheer for the winning team, for the annihilation of those that would wipe out Israel. That's where the story's taking us. The Jews' death sentence has been reversed, and the enemies that would annihilate them have been overcome by God's fingerprints and help, and by Mordecai and Esther. Faith and courage and failure all play into how God is using them and forming them. But still remember, the Jews never killed women or children, and they never plundered. Very clearly, didn't plunder. So that was interesting. But if you zoom out and you're just saying, okay, so here's a nation of Persia that is intent on wiping out every person from Israel, every Jew. I mean, how is that not satanic? How is that not, on the broader level, spiritual warfare? Have you heard of the term spiritual warfare? There is a vast spiritual war going on all around us all the time. Jesus came to tip those scales permanently, decisively, but there's still a war, because he didn't just disappear Satan. He didn't disappear the demons. He didn't disappear sin. It's still around, but we are victorious over it because of who Jesus is and what he's done, all right? And so Haman, a descendant of Agag, wants to wipe out all the Jews, like Pharaoh wanted to wipe out all the Jews. Like Amalek, when the Jews came out of Egypt, Amalek wanted to wipe out all the Jews. And in fact, that situation in Deuteronomy, God says, hey, remember Amalek? He wanted to wipe you all out. God is like, I'm doing this whole Messiah saving thing, and that's just not going to happen. So remember what he did and wipe him out. A couple hundred years later, King Saul very clearly faced Agag, Amalekite, and said, God's like, Saul, wipe him out. And Saul doesn't do it. He spares the king, and that king Agag, generation, gets us Haman, the evil man in Esther, who is intent on wiping out all the Jews. Incredible, right? And so we see that going on and on. So I was doing some research this week on Iran, for obvious reasons, but not so obvious was this. This is interesting. Did you know, if you're younger than 40 or 50, you probably have always known Iran as the bad guy. But up to 1979, Iran was very friendly to the West. In fact, in 1953, with the support of the CIA, we installed their king, the Shah, and he was very open to Western ideas. He changed laws that would allow Westerners to serve in their government. Of course, the hardcore Islamic people were just freaking out about that, and there was always tension. Anyway, back up to 1979, that's when the Iranian Revolution happened. There's movies about that. And that's when we, as in America, we're called the Great Satan. That's how they view the West. So that was a complete shift there. And Ayatollah Khomeini made some changes there. He's called the Supreme Leader. I always think of Snoke, the guy in Star Wars. You know what I mean? The Supreme Leader. But anyway, just the term Supreme Leader is really funny. All right. Anyway, it's interesting that in I read some news reports here, and it says that the Islamic Republic of Iran is not just a regional menace, but a global threat. Iran has openly vowed to annihilate Israel, wipe Jews off the map, destroy the United States, and dismantle Western democracy from within. That's their agenda today. And I'm reading the book of Esther, and I'm like, a little bit of congruency there. Persia is intent on wiping out all the Jews in 480 BC. And today, on the news, Persia is intent on wiping out the Jews today. Here's the key. I didn't read this. 1971, the Shah held a massive parade, 6,000 military troops in front of King Cyrus's tomb, and they celebrated 2,500 years of uninterrupted Persian monarchy. Persia is Iran. Iran is Persia. And they've seemingly always been intent on destroying the Jews. That's just fascinating, okay? So we'll get back to the text, but I just wanted to connect those dots. All right, verse 2. So the Jews gathered in their cities throughout all the provinces to lay hands on those who would harm them, and no one could stand against them, for the fear of them had fallen on peoples. All right, remember Mordecai and Esther, they go to the king, and Esther's like, hey, I want you to revoke, to kill the edict that Haman made against us. And the king's like, yeah, I can't do that. But what I can tell you to do is you can take my signet ring and go write another decree, and I'll support it. And okay, that's how that happened. But part of that edict, what Mordecai wrote, was we want to gather and we want to defend. And look at this verse. The Jews gathered and they defended. So this is a direct result of the second edict that Esther and Mordecai wrote, that they're able to do that. And verse 3, all the officials of the provinces, satraps, the governors, the royal agents, helped the Jews. That's a reversal. For fear of Mordecai had fallen on them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house. His fame spread throughout the provinces. The man Mordecai grew more and more powerful. Why isn't the book called Mordecai? Interesting, right? The Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them as they did as they pleased to those who hated them. And so that's the last. There's a lot of thumbprints in the book, but that's the last one I'm going to observe, okay? And so it looks like, I didn't mention this, but the first 13 verses, we have 500 people killed in Susa, plus the 10 sons of Haman, but they laid no hand on the plunder. Very clearly, it states that. But right here are the places we see God's fingerprints behind the scenes, even though he's never named. He is in a marital squabble. All right, Vashti is kicked out. There's a vacancy for Esther. Esther wins the beauty contest. Mordecai overhears the threat to the king to assassinate him, tells that to Esther. Esther tells it to the king, which sets up a whole scenario of things. When Haman rolls the dice, we say that, but casting lots, chance, which day of the year should I kill the Jews? It's 11 months down the road, gives them a lot of time to plan and do things. God's behind that. The words of a concerned cousin, the king can't sleep. That's very central to the book. I'll show you in a minute. The wife changes her mind. Haman goes home and says, hey, all these things happened. And she's like, you're a dead man. Okay, true. In the timing of a walk in the garden, the king goes out, and Haman falls on the queen. Remember that? What was it in the Mishnah that they said Gabriel shoved him into Haman, into the queen? Anyway, and then at the gallows, and then right now, in the heat of battle. Chapter 9, verse 5, in the heat of the battle, reversal. God has been involved in these things. But there's a large group of people that want to kill the Jews. They have 9 months to figure it out. Apparently, there's 800 armed enemies of Jews in Susa. I'm getting that number from the 500 they killed in the first 13 verses, and then the 300 they killed in 14 and 15. But again, they laid no hand on the plunder, okay? And so very clearly, that's what's going on there. So you get through this a couple verses down here. In verse 13, I don't know what your mental image is of Esther. Like just this sweet little kind, timid, super gentle, godly woman. But verse 13, she says, if it please the king, let the Jews who are in Susa be allowed tomorrow to do according to this edict, and let the 10 sons of Haman be hanged on the gallows. It's like, can we have just one more day of killing? It's just been so good. Please? And can we, Haman's sons were already dead. They hung them on the gallows as a public display of shame and a public display that the state of Persia is not on their side. The state of Persia is on the Jews' side. Huge. So that was a public shaming thing. Now, what's up with more killing? What's up with that? Okay, again, probably they know there's 800 people in Susa. They only got 500 of them, and we need to. They're going to kill us. We need to finish this. That's how I'm understanding that. She's not just bloodthirsty and vindictive and weird like that. Okay, so and then we go on here, and the story rolls along in the rest of the provinces. On the 13th of Adar, the day the Jews are supposed to be killed, they killed 75,000 in the rest all over Persia Empire, okay, that were going to kill them, just their enemies, no women or children. And again, no, they did not lay hand on the plunder 3 times. In the 14th of Adar, they rested, made a day of feasting and gladness. And then we get into this whole feasting thing. The book of Esther is one of those very intricately designed books. I don't know what your view of books in the Bible is, but you got to know that people didn't just sit down and crank out a paper that's due in the morning. You know what I mean? You've been in college, and you're like, oh, I got this, and you just kind of just fake it and go, and all right? No, this is really skillfully built. And so you have, from chapter 1, verse 2, Xerxes has a banquet, Esther has a banquet, Esther's first banquet, and in the middle of this, the king can't sleep. And then it pivots, Esther has a second banquet, and now Esther, instead of her coronation banquet, Mordecai has a promotion banquet, and then the Jews have a banquet corresponding to Xerxes' banquet. So you can see it's this mirror thing. It's called a chiastic structure, but this is just very common in Jewish literature. It's all over Old Testament, New Testament. It's just there. But it's interesting that the king can't sleep. Do you remember why the king couldn't sleep? It's because of the first banquet. Because the Esther invites Haman and the king and says, oh, something very, very important. Now, the last time she said something very important was, hey, my cousin Mordecai heard that you're going to be assassinated, so heads up, you want to probably do something about that. And so at the banquet, Esther's like, oh, so really important, got to tell you something really important, but yeah, I can't tell you in this company. Haman's here. And then, see ya, got to go. And so the king is like, what? Like, what? He's already got assassination in his head, and now she's sort of, anyway, so it's just brilliant. I love that part about Esther. And so then it goes on down here, and we have celebration. They gathered, they rested, there's feasting and gladness, there's a holiday, and so then there's the formalization of celebrating of Purim. So that's those verses. A massive multi-layer reversal that God has his fingerprints on. But notice, God isn't just doing this stuff and overriding human agency, nor is human agency without divine support, even when they fail and do dumb things. That somehow God has called them and called us to participate in his divine reversals. God is calling us to participate in divine reversals. And when you meet a person who's not saved and you introduce them to Jesus, that's a divine reversal. And he's called us to participate that, all right? So a lot of different layers to this whole thing. But the major theme here of reversal is all over the place in this book. In fact, you go to Isaiah, or as they say in the South, Isaiah. Anyway, Luke 4, one of my favorite passages in the Gospels is Luke 4, when Jesus picks up the scroll in his hometown, Nazareth, which is like just embarrassing. But anyway, Nazareth, it's the armpit of Galilee, like nothing good. But that's where he's from, so he picks up the scroll. He starts reading the scroll, and he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, the opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And he stops. And if you've seen The Chosen, it's great because he stops, he rolls it up, and then a little bit of conversation. He says, "Today, this has been fulfilled in your hearing." And they just lose their ever-loving minds. It's just fantastic, all right? Anyway, but Jesus is the author of all good reversal stories, right? He came to bring good news to the poor, bind up the broken heart, liberty to the captives, open those who are bound, a beautiful headdress instead of ashes, oil of gladness instead of mourning. This is all from Isaiah 61. A garment of praise instead of a faint spirit. Now, garments is an Old Testament way of just describing your whole being, okay? So it's not just like a shirt. You're changed from a person of faint spirit to a person of praising. Building up what have been torn down, rising up former devastations, repairing ruined cities. So this whole thing, Jesus is like, I am the king of reversals. In the story, Esther, we see God at his heart is reversals. And so if you are in a dead-end place, a rock and a hard place, of your own doing or someone else's doing or just the way it is, doesn't matter. Jesus is your only ticket to this deep divine reversal, okay? And again, he didn't come to give us comfort and wealth and health. If you grow up in this time period, in this continent that we live in, you would wrongly think that Jesus is supposed to make me happy and comfortable and healthy and wealthy, because that's what everybody says. And anyway, and that's not the way. He came to comfort us in our suffering, but he came also to draw us closer to himself and to call us to partner with him in divine reversals. To act, to step out and be involved in our own divine reversal, not alone, but with him. Like Paul said, I work harder than all the rest of them, yet not me alone, but Christ in me. It's that divine partnership. We are called to be agents of reversal for ourselves and for other people, okay? Fantastic. This is good news. So Jesus alone can reverse the effects of sin because Jesus alone died and conquered sin. That's why he's special. All right? So where are you looking for reversals? Whatever you've got, finances, health, relationships, you need a change. You need this thing to turn 180 because our culture spends a ton of money, and there's a lot of alternatives to get a reversal, to make things better. And you know what? If you can't really make things better, a lot of Christian churches, in a weird way, say, well, just put on a mask. How are you? I'm fine. Just fine. How are you? Kids are fine. Everything's fine. Isn't it fine? The war is fine. I like it. The weather's fine. And you're like, where do you live, man? It's hot. Anyway, okay, you get the idea. So we don't want to be shallow and plastic that way and weird, but when we need reversal, we better be looking at Jesus because he's the only way to do that. Okay, so now, are you ready for a tricky ending? Because this is where a lot of, when we read it, we fall off the truck. Verse 23. Now let's go to 24. For Haman, the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them. We know this. And he cast pur, that is the lots, like rolling the dice, to crush and destroy them. But, and this is like the biggest but in the Old Testament, but when it came before the king, he gave orders in writing that his evil plan that he had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, reversal, and that he and his son should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore, they call these days Purim after the term pur. Okay? So let me ask you a question. Why do they celebrate Purim? Why is it the name of the holiday Purim? Because this is a tool in a godless vice president's magicians, who are probably demonic, that's based entirely on chance, casting the pur. Why? Let's call our holiday that. after this evil VP number 2 guy who's motivated by satanic astrologers completely by chance, because we know God's thumbprints are all over the place. Right? So what are we calling it that for? Well, let's reread this. Slow down, go back to verse 25. Who was instrumental in these reversals? Okay, verse 25. But when Haman's plot came before the king, pause, how did Haman's plot come before the king? Esther. She's the one that had the banquet, the first banquet. I'd love to tell you this important stuff, but I can't because he's here. The second banquet, he's here, okay? Esther courageously brought the plot before the king. Continue on here in verse 25. The king gave orders in writing that Haman's evil plan that he had devised against the Jews should return on his own head. Why did the king give orders that Haman's evil plan should be reversed and land on his own head? Esther, again, is making this very clear. She asked him, please revoke this decree, and he's like, I can't revoke it, but again, take my ring, you can go write whatever you want, and that's going to be permanent, and so you can gather and defend yourselves. That's what they do. Going on in verse 25. And that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Why? Why were they hung on gallows? Again, it's not just vindictive. It was a statement of the government supporting the Jews. Look what happens to those that oppose the Jews. The population would be like, got it. Support the Jews, okay? They get that. Therefore, that's why we call it Purim. So it has nothing to do with Haman, because if I asked you, like, why is it called Purim? You'd be like, oh, well, because Haman, he did the Purim thing, I guess. That doesn't make any sense. Esther is at the heart of all these turnarounds, okay? So it's called Purim in the Jewish mindset because of God's fingerprints and Esther's role in reversing this, which is why it's called Esther and not Mordecai or not called Purim, okay? All right. But God loves to flip the script. Right? He flips the script of your life, of our life, sometimes an institution or a country. But how does he flip the script? Listen carefully. He flips the script by scripting the flip. He intentionally scripts, and his fingerprints are behind, shaping the narrative and the story. He scripts it out, the reversal. All right? And so he's always done. Joseph, I love the story of Joseph in Genesis. If you don't know that, it's in Genesis 45 to 50. Great story. But Joseph says he was sold by his brothers and ends up in Egypt. And he says, don't be angry with yourselves because you sold me here, because God sent me here. And he says, God sent me here. It was not you that sent me here, but God. And I'm like, no, it was the brothers. I've got a verse. They sold you. But Joseph's mind, he's like, I understand God has other plans, the other pictures, and his fingerprints and reversals. And he's like, God put me here to reverse this famine and to be involved in the way I am. That would never have happened if you, brothers, hadn't sold me in slavery. So that's a great model of how to deal with disaster and understand that God's fingerprints are involved, all right? And the Exodus coming out of Egypt, the crucifixion, we have to kill this guy because he's annoying us and he rises from the dead. And another good one is Acts 1:8. You will be my witnesses in Judea, Samaria, and Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, all the ends of the earth. Well, that's just fantastic because that's the way it happened. Isn't that just wonderful? Just these people taking the gospel and just going all over the world. Let's just get some tea. It's just lovely. Except, why did they leave Jerusalem and go to Judea and Samaria? And why did they leave Judea and Samaria and go to the ends of the earth? Because they were being killed. Persecution. This is flipping the script. It's not always in our favor in terms of comfort. Oh, you're in Jerusalem. Great. I'd like you to take my gospel and go, and if you don't leave by Thursday, you'll be dead. Okay, I'm going to Galatia. Hey, you're in Galatia. That's great. Love it here, but if you don't leave by Thursday, you're dead. I'm going to go to Rome or wherever, okay? So my point is, persecution still exists in the midst of God's fingerprints and the script that he is writing, and we don't like that, right? You go home today and like, hey, what was church? What did the pastor guy say? He said, God scripts death and disaster for me. That's not what I'm saying, okay? Not what I'm saying, but neither is it God scripts comfort, wealth, and health for me. And that's It's a great American Christian dream. And that's not at all what we see in Scripture. Okay, so anyway, end of rant, kind of. But we love turnaround stories, movies like The Blind Side, the football thing, or Cinderella Man, the boxing thing, or Moneyball, which I just love that whole baseball turnaround thing. It's fantastic. Shawshank Redemption, it has the word redemption in it, so it must be biblical. Anyway, so... But God is a God of redemptions. This is one of my favorite verses. I'm trying to figure out how to do this with a tattoo, but I haven't figured it out yet. Our God is a God of salvation, and to God the Lord belong deliverances from death. Is that just good or what? Deliverances from death, right? That He specializes in reversals. Now, it's meaningless to be delivered from death unless you are facing death. Wait, but if you're facing death, well, where is the goodness of God? Why am I facing death? Because we live in a broken world and super bad things can happen. You better bring your A game. You better engage in wisdom, because if you don't, you will get run over by a truck. People will steal your money, and they steal your mountain bikes. What in the world? Anyway. So He is a God who loves turnaround stories. The gospel is a turnaround story. Satan has a script for your life. The front door to that script is temptation. He lies, he steals, he destroys. It looks good. In fact, Adam and Eve in the garden, the fruit looks good. It's shiny. It would be so good to eat. It's pleasant to the eyes. Jesus, Matthew 4, same thing. Well, look at the kingdoms. They look good. You can have them. What about bread? I bet you're hungry. It's been 40 days. And then are you really who you are, your identity? Jump off the temple and prove it to me. The same things always come with Satan's temptation. We have to be aware of that. So God also has a script, and the front door of that script is the gospel. It's the good news of what Jesus has done. Through faith in His Son, His death and resurrection, we can be reunited to God, completed on the innermost parts of our being. We can rest. Even though we have turmoils and things, our mountain bikes are stolen, it's not the end of the world. I use that trivially. I know that there are weighty, painful disappointments in this audience and beyond, but you get my point, okay? God wants us to flourish. And so these Jews in Persia, I've mentioned this before, they're there. They did not return when Cyrus said, "Go home," and Zerubbabel said, "Come with me, I'm going." They got off script. They didn't listen. They got distracted or maybe just rebelled, I don't know. But listen to a couple verses here from the prophets about getting out of Babylon. Isaiah 48. "Go out from Babylon, flee from Chaldea. The Lord has redeemed His servant Jacob." It's almost like, hey, I've done a lot of work here. You think this was easy, getting in Cyrus's head and making him do all this stuff? The door's open. What are you doing staying here? To stay in Persia, what does that mean about how you're viewing God's redemption? Jeremiah 50, "Flee from the midst of Babylon, go out of the land of the Chaldeans, for behold, I am stirring up and bringing against Babylon a gathering of great nations from the north," the Medes and the Persians. Get out of here. They're coming. And I can imagine some people are like, "Oh, man, my business is going good. And the whole Yahweh, Israel, I'm just whatever. You guys are just old people talk about that, right? So I don't really want to go. And besides, this new Cyrus guy, he's so tolerant. No big deal." And then Xerxes come, and they want to kill us. And it's like, oof, I should have left when I could. All right. So we enter the story. There's a royal court, and there's a very satanic script to kill them all. Wow. Reversal. God is the author of divine reversals, all right? So many things throughout this book. They go on and make the Feast of Purim official. Let's go to chapter 10. This is where it gets weird. Chapter 10, verse 1. "King Ahasuerus imposed a tax on the land." And okay, if you're reading this and you're thinking, you're like, did I miss a page? Like, what? Who cares? What? Okay, remember way back when Haman said, "Hey, king, there's this certain people that's dispersed in your land, and they're not worth bothering about. I'll give you 10,000 talents of silver, and I'll just take care of the problem." Well, this whole thing got reversed, and so the royal treasury is not going to get 10,000 talents of silver. And so what this verse is saying is that the Jews are off the hook for producing that money that was promised to the throne. Because the king instituted a tax on everybody, not just the Jews only. You see what's going on there? So again, the Jews are protected. His thumb, that I should add that to the thumbprint is there on taxes. Ooh, that's complicated. But anyway, all right, so it's verse 2. All the acts of his power and his might, now we're talking about the king, the full account of the high honor of Mordecai to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of Chronicles, the Mede and the Persians? For Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to Ahasuerus. Second in rank. That's interesting because Haman was second in rank. Mordecai was great among the Jews. Well, Haman used to be a big deal. Mordecai was popular with the multitude of his brothers. Haman wanted to be popular, at least. And Mordecai sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to his people. Yeah, Haman never did that, all right? You can see the gap growing here. But this book awkwardly closes by praising Mordecai in an uncomfortable way. And I don't know what to do with this. Either the author is intentionally praising Mordecai while being silent about their God who did everything, or it's a way to invite the question, who do you praise when you get your story reversed? We're praising Mordecai. In fact, I don't have much time here, but Isaiah 44 and 45, this is about Cyrus. Isaiah 44, God says, who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, he shall fulfill my purposes. Cyrus is in the hand of God in terms of what he's doing, and Cyrus is doing this of his own free volition. Isaiah 45:1, the Lord said to his anointed, the word anointed is Messiah. The Lord said to his Messiah, Cyrus, wow, whose right hand I have grasped to subdue him. I will go before you, that you may know that is I am the Lord, the God of Israel, who calls you by name, though you do not know me. And here's the key verse. God says, I form light and darkness. I make well-being and create calamity. I am the Lord who does these things. Now, there are some people who look at just verse 7 and go, God says he creates calamity. Therefore, any calamity I see, God did that. Okay, read the context. These people are praising Cyrus because of all the calamity, because of all the stuff. And Isaiah's like, yeah, Cyrus is in the hands of God. You should be praising God. At the end of Esther, you should not be praising Mordecai. You should be praising God who did everything. You see what I'm saying? So that's the context there of what's going on. All right. So do you need a reversal? Do you need a reversal from brokenness, emotions, finances, whatever it could be? Where are you looking for that? Because again, in our culture, so many people have so many ways for you to spend money reversing your problems. All right? Jesus is the only one. He works behind the scenes, and this is the part I love. We see it in the book of Esther. He works through our failures, through our faith and our success and our failures to accomplish his ends. I cannot answer how that works. I cannot answer how I'm doing my thing, and sometimes it's sinful and sometimes it's good, and I do not thwart God's overall purposes. I'm called to participate with his purposes. I miss out when I'm not doing that, but I can't get God in a corner and go, ha-ha, now you're stuck. Yeah, it just doesn't work that way, okay? So I'm encouraged by the book of Esther because I see his fingerprints everywhere, and I'm reminded to thank him for reversals, not to thank Mordecai, Cyrus, or whatever else we thank when things go really, really well, all right? Going to wrap up here. We have a couple questions. Do I need my story to be reversed? God flips the script by scripting the flip. That is, he flips your story by intentionally writing another story. There's no chance with God. It's intentional, okay? Trust him with his script of your reversal. It will involve discomfort because he's not primarily concerned about our comfort. He's concerned about his kingdom and other people knowing him, okay? And so we end up with a couple questions. Do you need a reversal in a situation, a season, or a circumstance? Where are you looking to get that reversal, to get that change? Can you see his fingerprints leading you to his flipping of your script? It takes faith, and sometimes that arc, that story arc, is really long, and so we'll have fingerprints and years and sometimes decades of fingerprints before we see, I think I see what God was doing way back there. And that's difficult to wait decades, but we're not called to see the end of every story arc. We're called to be faithfully worshiping Him today and trusting that He will do what He does, which is reversals, okay? Lord, thank you for reversing our hearts through the gospel of Jesus. Thank you that He was so faithful, even though His disciples didn't want Him to go to the cross and no one understood it. He alone had clarity and He went. We thank you, Jesus, for doing that. We pray that we would look to you for the reversals we need. And we pray that we would let go of the things that get us wrapped around the axle that really are not that big of a deal in the first place. So thank you for being good, thank you for being faithful, and thank you for being involved in our faith, our failures, and our success. Amen.